Good afternoon, and welcome to our webcast, The Future of Work Leadership Playbook for 2021 and Beyond. For those of you who I've not met, I'm Dan Meyer, publisher of BizTimes Media. Welcome. Thank you for attending today's webcast, which is presented by GreenUp Solutions, Olenberg LLC, and R&R Insurance Services, powered by BT360 Content Solutions, and that is a storytelling arm of BizTimes Media. What will business as usual mean in 2021? How will we work and where? Experts in work culture, organizational leadership, insurance, and HR join BT360 for a look at how the workplace is likely to be forever changed and what strategies businesses can implement now to prepare for the transition that's coming. In today's webcast, our expert presenters will discuss and help you navigate your way through a variety of topics, including taking charge of the future. What can we control today? Understanding new customer demands and changing employee needs, building and maintaining business culture and morale, increasing employee productivity with safe environments, and much more. The slide deck will be available after you fill out the attendee survey at the conclusion. But before we begin, on behalf of BizTimes Media, I'd like to thank you for your readership support and for your print and digital advertising support, event sponsorships, and for attending this webcast today. This is our 25th year as an independent family-owned business, and we're the only locally owned business media company in the region. Our goal is to serve this community for 25 and well beyond that, more years, and I guarantee we'll work hard every day to earn your business and to help you grow your business through our custom and integrated marketing programs. If you're interested, please contact our sales director, Linda Crawford. In addition, our award-winning editorial team is always looking for story ideas, especially forward-looking operational insight stories that can help our readers make more informed decisions in running their company, or insights on how to be better leaders themselves. Earlier this year, we launched an insider subscriber program. For $8 a month, you can be an insider and receive several insider benefits, including access to all the content produced by our editorial team. It's also your opportunity to support local journalism. Before I introduce the presenters, I want to mention that today's webcast is being recorded and will be available on demand on our website tomorrow and even possibly this afternoon. As I mentioned earlier, upon conclusion of the program, please fill out the attendee survey to access the slide deck. So now on to the presenters. They include Jessica Olenberg, managing partner with Olenberg LLC. Jessica, welcome.
Thank you, Dan. Happy to be here. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. And Nikki Johnson, Director of Human Resources with R&R Insurance Services. Hello, Nikki, and welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm super happy to be here.
Glad you're here as well. And Andy Wines, President of GreenUp Solutions. Andy, welcome.
Thanks, Dan. Looking forward for this opportunity to join the team and give a lot of learning to occur here today.
Excellent. So during the presentations and discussion, please submit your questions. We've had a number of them submitted already through the registration process, but use the Q&A feature on your screen. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Jessica Olenberg, Managing Partner of Olenberg LLC. Jessica, take it away.
Thanks, Dan. Again, so happy to be here. I want to give special thanks to Dan, Andy, Nikki, the BizTimes team, and everyone who's taking time to be with us today or who will join us later in the replay of the webinar. Thank you and welcome. What I'm bringing as far as the perspective on today's topics includes a perspective about four decades of case study and research, specifically related to leadership, business planning, and employment law. And some of the things that we're going to be doing is I will be bringing some case studies today, but we'll also be protecting client privacy as we always do. We have received already, as Dan mentioned, a good deal of questions, which we've got queued up and we're ready to go after our three presenters today. But we continue to encourage you to send in questions as we're talking where you might want to dive a little deeper. And we'll be happy to look at whatever we have time to do once we open the floor for some really good discussion after our three presenters finish up. That being said, let's launch into now is the time for leaders to shine. And permanent change is imminent. That there is no question that there is a silver lining opportunity to really make some forward moving changes, capture some new opportunity, and make your business better than it ever was before. And that's always the goal, is constant improvement. We already know a good deal, and early mover status could certainly pay off. What does 2021 leadership look like is one of the things that we're hoping will be a takeaway for you today, and we'll be getting into a deeper dive on that topic. We'll be looking at what we control, what we can control, and how we can prepare for what we can't control, but have some ideas about where that might go. And we'll be sharing some ranges of options so that everybody can get some sense and get some consensus with their teams about the range of possibilities. 2020 has been a big point of change, and most businesses will not be returning to exactly what they had been doing before, but rather, instead of using that as prologue, they will be using it as experience and trajectory and statistics and know-how to move forward into 2021 and beyond with a much better competitive edge. We're going to be looking at some silver lining learnings as we go through all of this. And next slide, please. Maslow, many people have seen Maslow, and Maslow also feeds into some other theories which are ancillary over time, including ERG, etc. This is another really important thing to look at, and look at it with your leaders moving forward, because what we're seeing is the safety needs and the physiological needs are really being changed by this pandemic, not just by the pandemic alone, but also by the factors of how we might be working at home, working remotely, working differently, creating new questions of what does safety look like? Where are we experiencing new fears of change and the unknown, especially for those who are averse to change? The lockdown taught people a lot about themselves and each other. Customer, employee, and all unique stakeholder demand is shifting with a sense of longer term impact. We know that some customers will look at this as something to be entirely over, but most will pick and choose what their needs are and their wants are moving forward, and that's going to change. Lasting impact is expected. We need to build trust as companies, and we need to meet those new motivators very critically, because people not feeling safe and clean and feeling at harm in however they're working, or if they're a customer, if they're a stakeholder, they're going to be looking for those physiological and safety needs a lot more than you might have seen pre-pandemic. So reverting that, those, if you remember the thoughts of moving up the Maslow scale, those needs typically need to be met before people will really respond to the ever important positive feedback and some of those self-esteem motivators that will remain critically important, but now need to be combined with some new alleviation of what fears might have come in during this time. And we have some really good solutions to get that done, and we've seen some people do some fabulous things. So it's not necessarily as tricky as you might think. Some things that we've seen gone really right are customers who receive messages about safety, cleanliness, and assurance, and the action plans that are being taken. We're seeing that that's affecting how people will return to businesses they used to work with. We're seeing the very same for employees. They want those assurances, and they want that above and beyond. Some things that are not being done so well are when people lose focus on how to create that assurance. Recently noticed a car manufacturer changed their branding to "we're in the people business." Uh, as far as safety goes, I want my car manufacturer in the car business. And it's great to have the people personal touch, but I'm spending more time in my car wanting that to be safe, and certainly more after COVID, than I'm spending time with the folks at the dealership. When we look at Maslow a little bit more closely, again, we've got the physiological and the safety needs really being important. And then beyond that, we're looking at the social needs, the esteem motivators, and the self-actualization. A little bit, and throughout this program, we're going to be talking about remote work, what that looks like, and who should be doing it. And social needs are going to come into play there as well. There's a range of possibilities for remote work, a big range of possibilities. And we have a lot of statistics already, and most of them are not plug and play. Organizations are unique depending upon how the industry. Tech industry is going to be much more likely to adopt tech practices and have the systems and the mindsets of the employees to make that happen. Other things are going to be, what does the visibility of work look like, and to what extent can we accommodate that through remote work? We'll be looking at what worked and what didn't work during the pandemic, and using that information for each unique company as a benchmark for what they should be doing in 2021. The interaction of the job itself, what type of interaction is required in that inherent job description, and to what extent can that be accommodated virtual. And of course, again, getting back to a little bit of the social needs, introversion versus extroversion. You're looking at people who are going to have a different propensity to want to be in a highly social environment versus being able to work a little bit more secluded with socialization on demand. And then, of course, employment law compliance is going to be really critical to whether or not that remote working is appropriate. Next slide. Thank you. We will be talking about rethinking leadership styles for 2021. You know, the big three are autocratic, participative, laissez-faire. And, you know, we talk about the general definitions of those and how those may come into play. Authoritative or autocratic being very controlling. It might, the extensive version of that might be micromanaging, but it's a style that is more of a management style than a leadership style. And it's used where your team members or your leadership members, whomever it's being used with, has very little subject matter knowledge. And it's not worth transferring that knowledge at that particular time based upon the critical urgency of the situation. If we're having a building emergency, we don't stop to talk about all the possible ways we could fix it. We fix it. If it's something that's going to be repetitive, we want people to learn how to do it without leadership instruction next time. And it doesn't necessarily elicit ideas, so it may not be the most advantageous when we're looking for the creative ideas that help us get to that next version of our company. Participative will probably be a lot more common. It's always been the most preferred, at least for decades, and since we've been learning about it. But in 2021, servant leadership is also a form of participative leadership. And the advantage is that it helps people to learn. It helps people to learn how to make better decisions without relying upon others in the future. So to elicit creativity and elicit good problem solving, that's going to be a lot more at the forefront. Laissez-faire is going to also have its place in that there can be a piece where we really need to reinvent something and we really need to start with the abandonment of what we knew before and piece that in later. Sometimes just giving people no boundaries and seeing what they do can be very revealing to that effect. But you need to have some boundaries around it so that people don't feel foolish or feel like they've really misstepped and can't get over the embarrassment of it. So ultimately, situational will be a great place to be. Transformational versus maintenance leaders will be a very important thing to think about. Some leaders are wonderful at transformation. They are great at creating change. They want to create change and they want to make everything brand new and put their own label on it and take ownership in that, but can get really bored after the change is done and now it's just maintenance. Other people are much better in a maintenance leader type of a role where the change isn't necessarily at the forefront of their skills, but they're really comfortable in having a protocol and routinely rolling that out with consistency. And that has a lot of value when we need to be as consistent as we need to be for employment law purposes and for the purposes of operations. Lastly, and real quickly, De Bono's 6 hats. And this was popularized decades ago by companies such as ABB and IBM. It's used by a lot of companies today. And we did a workshop for MMAC a few years back, actually at Johnson Controls, who really used 6 hats a lot. It was a wonderful workshop as we were teaching other employers in the community about the 6 hats. And the 6 hats, if you're not familiar with it, it's definitely worth looking into because it's a great tool for problem solving and creative planning. You've got the white hat for neutrality and objective. You've got the red hat to see rage and emotion for an emotional view and emotional response, which can be really wonderful at reading stakeholder responses. Black hat thinking allows us to figure out what might go wrong before it does. Yellow hat thinking is positive. Everything is good. We're going to take that black hat and we're going to say, okay, how can we make this better? Green hat is it is grass, it's vegetation, it's fertile, it's growth. It is the absolute commitment to creativity and new ideas. And then the blue hat is color of the sky, but it's also cool and it's above everything else, concerned with the control. Once you have, and of course, I'm oversimplifying it to get this into a 90-second overview, but when you apply the 6 hats, it can be a wonderful tool moving into 2021. And I highly recommend at least looking at it if you haven't worked with it before. Next slide, please.
Jessica, I'm going to ask that you spend not more than a minute on these next 2 slides. We can come back, but I want to make sure we get to.
Yes, and I'm looking at that too, Dan, and we're good. We are absolutely good with that. So what success requires in 2021 and beyond? We're looking for clean and safe. We're looking for due diligence as reasonable care. Courts are not seeking the control of human behavior, but they are seeking reasonable care and affirmative defense. They want assurance of cleanliness and safety beyond the norm. We have the ability to use the 2020 statistics in planning, and to invest into action about what's known now and write down questions and prepare problem-solving people and methodology for quicker solutions as that information comes to us over the course of the next year. This methodology and having that plan for how we're going to monitor information and who's going to respond to it is also what the health departments are looking for. So that goes hand in hand and does not become extra work. And then we're going to be looking at wellness. Again, beyond the importance, the critical importance of keeping people healthy as both humans and of course performers, we'll be looking to avoid catastrophic claims and adding due diligence for controlling the premiums. And lastly, racial tension. 2021 will bring about new trainings in anti-harassment and anti-discrimination. And with THC and marijuana legality, we're looking at new DNA policies, including OTC and prescription. And to wrap that all up, the 4-point plan, and our last slide here, is to reevaluate and redetermine your business plan, including scenario options, to craft a strategic, clear, and effective message for each unique stakeholder audience, aligning those messages, know and manage risks and liabilities, and collect data, determine benchmark criteria, and begin forward prudent movement with performance management.
That's great. We can come back to that because I think that's a slide that all three panelists, you all can weigh in on and talk about that, because leadership issues are, it's probably one of the more important things that we know that our readers, the business community, are always challenged by and want to know more about how to navigate those issues. So thanks, Jessica. Before I turn it over to Nikki Johnson, just make sure if you have any questions, send them in with a Q&A feature on the screen. So Nikki, I'll turn it over to you with your information.
Sounds good. As mentioned earlier, my name is Nikki Johnson, and I'm the HR director here at R&R Insurance. I've been in HR for about 16 years. And actually, up until July of this year, I was leading human resources within manufacturing. So I'm super happy to be here today to talk about a topic that is something that's near and dear to my heart and that I'm passionate about. So as we've talked about, we're living in a world right now that's just so full of uncertainty. And what my role is in today's presentation is to tell you some tactical things that you can do today to affect your culture, your engagement of your employees, your morale, things that you can do today that will impact your workers today and obviously then into the future as well. As unemployment rates start to normalize again and companies start to suspend those hiring freezes and put up those help wanted signs, I can guarantee that your best employees are getting targeted. And the reason that I know that is because I'm one of those people that targets them. I'm always looking for top talent. And that's because part of my job is recruiting the best to the organizations I work for. Next slide. So with that being said, I want to talk to you about ways to prevent that from happening. I want to talk to you about how you as a leader can be well and help your employees be well, how you can be the best leader imaginable, an awesome leader, and strategies to help your workplace truly be the place to be. And the things that I'm going to talk about really work well, whether you are having people come into the office or the plant, or they're working remote. We've talked a ton about remote work, and I'm going to touch on parts of that, but not everybody's going to go remote 100% in 2021. So I'm really trying to capture the audience there of you manufacturers that will never go remote. So you'll learn a little bit, regardless of where your employees are sitting. Next slide, please. As Jessica mentioned, human beings have this need to feel safe. And today I could give you every leadership trick in the book, but if you don't have people in your organization that are feeling safe, none of it matters. I'm not telling you to not pay attention to anything else that I say today, but that's something that you'll want to focus on if you don't think that you're doing everything necessary to keep your people safe at work, whether that's related to the pandemic or that's just general safe work practices. So if employees are catching wind that you're bypassing safe work practices, their inherent need to feel safe isn't going to be met. So that's a really good starting point to improve upon. In the meantime, you need to be a role model. So as leaders, we need to follow the rules that we have in place at our workplaces. The best example that I can give you right now that really is true for our current state is that you need to stay home when you're sick if you're telling your employees to stay home when they're sick. I think the best practice for the future is going to be that we continue to tell our employees to stay home when they're sick. And I honestly think that we're going to have to take a really long, hard look at our attendance policies to make sure that we're creating a culture where it's expected that you stay home when you're sick. And that starts with you, because there's a long-standing cultural fear in the workplace that we need to just toughen up and get to work. And you can't expect your employees to stay home when they're ill if you are in the office sneezing and coughing all day long. Even in the uncertainty that we're facing this year and the year to come, it's so important that we don't lose sight of how important we as human beings are, and that it's really important that we take care of ourselves mentally and physically. If you're mentally and physically exhausted, you're more likely going to fly off the handle or be less than empathetic to your employees' needs. If you have a lot of stress going on, you could be highly emotionally reactive to stressful times, and that's only going to make it worse for your team. They're already going through enough. The last thing that they need is for you to bring to work your own stress. So the bottom line is that if you can't take care of your own needs, how are you going to take care of the needs of your team? So make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Talking about our roles as leaders, in the future, it's so much more than just delegating work and directing our employees. And we're getting involved in things that we probably never thought that we'd be involved in. There's such a clear link between physical health and increased risk for mental health issues. So as your physical health deteriorates, oftentimes your mental health does too. And likewise, when you're in a poor mental state, that can impact your physical health as well. And all of that, you think, well, why does that matter to me? It's none of my business what is going on in my employees' personal lives. Those things that happen outside of work affect your employees' productivity, their dependability, their engagement, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So as you plan for the future, mental and physical health issues need to continue to be top of your mind. Telling you that, but what do you actually do? First thing I want to talk about is EAP resources. Now is the time to communicate about your EAP. A lot of us have EAPs to offer our employees, but we don't take the time to actually communicate what that means. The other thing is that your leaders within your organization are the first line of defense. They may have an employee come up to them and say, I've got all this stress going on. I'm trying to virtually school my kids and I just can't take it anymore. That is the cue for your leader to be able to hand over that phone number or brochure about the EAP, because they're not going to come up necessarily to the leader and say, hey, I need a brochure for the EAP. It's going to be these trigger words that your supervisors are hearing that should warrant, passing out of the pamphlet. Now, I'm not saying that you need to diagnose your employees with mental health issues, because that will likely have them coming to human resources, and you don't want that. But you shouldn't be afraid to share that information with your team. And if you don't have an EAP, consider adding it to your benefits package, because they're usually reasonably priced and easy to implement. I also encourage you to think outside of the box when it comes to your employees' health. One of the things that we did at R&R is a gratitude campaign. We encouraged employees to submit pictures of what they're most thankful for in 2020, and we're putting those pictures up on a video loop at our cafeteria. And the reason we do that is practicing gratitude is super impactful both to your mental health at home and in the workplace. So beyond just mental health, now is a great time to also kick off some wellness initiatives. There's been concerns brought up by insurance carriers that because people have been less likely to get their wellness visits taken care of in 2020, there may be an increased risk of things like heart attacks in the year to come. And while a lot of people found more time to work out and eat healthy during quarantine, a lot of other people have put on some additional weight because of just not being in their routine. So I'd have you consider looking closely at your wellness strategies, maybe doing something like a fitness challenge or the take off the quarantine 10 pounds challenge, something like that. Impacts you, your team, and it also can hopefully impact your insurance costs. The next thing I believe that we need to focus on in the future is keeping an eye on our A players. While we're all stressed, I think that the future of work is that we're going to continue to burn out those A players. The natural tendency is that we lean on those people and we pile them with work because they're the people that do a great job. But they're human beings too, obviously, and they're humans that have the same stresses that everybody else has. So if we continue to lean too heavily on them, we're going to break them and they're going to leave us. And the last thing is using your paid time off. And you might be like laughing at me right now because you're probably thinking, hey, Nikki, I can't go anywhere. I don't like using my paid time off to just sit at home. I'm not going to do it. I really discourage you from enacting any sort of changes to your policies for today, tomorrow, or the future related to vacation rollovers or payouts, just because you and your employees haven't been able to get on a plane or drive across the country. Time off is needed, and the purpose of vacation is mentally detaching from work, and that doesn't have to be done on a beach or in the tropics. So it's really important that you're using your time off. Next slide. So moving on, there's one thing that I know that you can control right now in a world where we feel like we don't have control, and that's you. You can step up your leadership game and not be just a good leader, but be an awesome leader. And if you're already an awesome leader, kudos to you. You can work on being an even more awesome leader. The first thing is that we have to accept the fact that uncertainty is here to stay and that we're going to have to make decisions without clarity. Perfection isn't possible right now, and accepting that fact and giving your team stability is super important. Along the same lines, we can't drag our feet when it comes to making decisions. Knowing that we don't have clarity, I think we all need to start thinking about the what ifs and mapping out a plan to be ready for the possible scenarios ahead. One example that I have is none of us know what the federal government is going to do in terms of passing another Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act or a Families First Act, which expire at the end of this year. So what are you going to do? Are you paying your people? Are they going to have to use vacation? If you do pay your people, what if there's not a package? Like, how much is that going to cost you? So my opinion is planning through like the worst case scenarios will help you to make a decision and put your best leadership foot forward. The next thing should be obvious. Don't judge. But in my career, I've worked with a lot of managers who aren't able to see beyond their own lenses. And understanding your employee's box of life is super important right now. And I guarantee it'll pay you dividends. You might have one employee who's struggling because she can't see her family right now. And you have another employee who's just as unhappy at the fact that he can't go to the gym. So as we approach the new year, it's super important not to downplay how bad this year has possibly been for your team. Next, we talked a lot about technology and staying connected. Technology allows you to continue to have a presence with your team. And quite frankly, I think virtual meetings are here to stay. I hear people in my organization saying, hey, these are like super efficient and cool, and I don't have to leave my office. So if you don't have something like Microsoft Teams or Zoom, consider just recording a video, and it even can be on your phone. The newest members of your workforce have grown up on video rather than words as an important part of how they communicate. And I really encourage you to use video. It's much more effective than email. So, we're approaching the holidays, so maybe you can consider putting a video together where the employees can see your face and you can thank them for everything they've done this year, a particularly tough year. And with that scenario, you're practicing both gratitude and being present for your employees. I'll tell you that from experience, it's so much tougher to stay connected to your employees who are actually working virtually. It's that kind of that out of sight, out of mind phenomenon. With that, you as a leader need to really make a conscious effort to check in with those employees, and not just on the work stuff. Put something on your calendar to catch up with those employees, to just have a conversation about what's going on in life. Next slide, please. So my last slide is about helping your workplace be the place to be. So let's say that you're an employer that wants people in your facility. I really super encourage you to work on being the place to be, being that escape from the isolation of being at home. So these suggestions that I have work whether you're remote or you're in the office, but a lot of this too also really focuses on having a laser focus on being the place to be if you're going to require people to come into work. So first of all, recognition. I'll be honest, this is one of my leadership musts. It's so easy to miss it. And in my career, one of the biggest increases in employee engagement comes from celebrating the efforts of your team. And not just focusing on the big wins, but celebrating the small stuff. And we don't celebrate enough. I know it should go without saying, but I've worked with some leaders who have the words, could you please, or thank you, that they don't exist in their vocabulary. I never talk to or write to my employees in a way that I would be embarrassed if that communication somehow ended up on the evening news. And keep in mind that it only takes one of those kind of snarky, nasty, possibly condescending emails for your direct report to pick up that phone call from Nikki the recruiter. Us recruiters love to capitalize on your employees' bad days. Taking it just a little further, I recommend that you put a task on your calendar to write thank you notes. Maybe you do one a month or two a month. Taking 5 minutes to write a thank you note is super impactful. And from personal experience, I've seen those notes that I've written my employees still hanging up in their offices 3 years later, and it doesn't cost a thing. It's super important that you stay connected, and just for the interest of time, I'll kind of skip over that, but obviously making sure that you try to make time for your employees to stay connected and not just always focusing on work. In the coming years, our workplaces need to continue to be flexible, and we need to continue to give ourselves and our employees some grace. If you have an employee that has performance issues, I'm not telling you to just ignore those, but everybody right now is facing unique challenges that we never thought that we would. Moms and dads are trying to work and virtually school their children. Daycares are closing with no notice. And I know that you've got a place of business to run. I just don't think now is the time to terminate employment for someone that is really making an effort, but is getting thrown all of these curveballs when it comes to school and daycare closures. And then lastly, have fun. So work hard, play hard. The mood might not be super celebratory these days, but it's a huge mistake to get rid of all of those social routines because they are so impactful. I have done so many exit interviews in my career, and I will tell you that the relationships that employees have amongst themselves is always the thing that people say is the thing that they'll miss the most when they leave an employer. It's those relationships. Nobody ever says, I am really going to miss my desk. I'm really going to miss the work that I did. They always say, I'm going to miss my coworkers. And a lot of that comes from having fun. It's so important to laugh and have fun. At R&R, we did an Embarrass the Boss fundraiser for the United Way. And I can tell you, seeing our owner dressed up as Tiger King, which this picture is up there. Hopefully he's not embarrassed that I put this on here, but we raised some extra money. We had so many laughs. It was incredible. And one employee even commented, well, that was a morale booster in like 8 hours. So maybe consider doing some sort of themed work days this holiday season, like where everybody wears an ugly sweater or a Santa hat. And instead of just canceling those holiday parties that you're probably thinking about, use that budget to give a gift card to your employees to buy themselves some dinner and do a virtual holiday party via Zoom or Skype. So I really encourage you to think of ways to infuse some fun in your workplace right now, because we all certainly need it. It's been a tough year.
Nikki, thank you so much.
Yep.
Our final presenter before we open it up for questions is Andy Wines. Andy's the president of Green Up Solutions. Make sure to submit your questions so we can get to those after Andy's done in the Q&A feature. So Andy, I will turn it over to you. It's all yours.
Hey, appreciate that so much, Dan. Thank you for everybody that's attending, and Jessica and Nikki for setting things up. We talk about the future of work. Jessica did a great job of talking about why it's important that we make the necessary changes. And Nikki gave us some really good examples of how we can do that, how we can move forward as an organization. And what I want to tackle today is the what. There's a lot of things that we cannot control in this world. However, when it comes to the physical space of your building, there's things that we can control. And I want to talk about how we're going to control those things, what we need to do to ensure that we are going to have an engaged workforce. We're going to have leadership that lives up to those values that Nikki had talked about. But also we're going to talk about, to Jessica's point, about the compliance piece. We know that government is going to be changing things, and how we respond and get out in front of it is going to be very important and crucial as we do bring people back into those businesses like manufacturing, where we have to have a physical presence. So we'll jump right into it, talk about what we're going to do and what we can control. Next slide, please. So it's real simple. There's a cost to cleanliness. We've all had employees that have been out of work for a day or days on end. We've all had employees that came in and all of a sudden we saw the flu or a cold sweep through our offices. And as that happens, people get sick, and then there's the lost time. Whether they use PTO to take the time off, or they have sick leave utilized, there's also the loss of production, because you have the one person gone, and that's going to impact the team, that impacts the organization. When we look at labor statuses, we're talking about $1,600 to $3,600 is the simple cost, basically, for absenteeism per employee per year. And that, again, not everybody's sick, but how does that individual that's out for a day impact the overall business? Now, there's a couple stats that we put here, because when we think about hygiene and clean, what is the ROI on having a infectious disease control program, which is a really fancy name, saying your cleaning program? Well, if you look here, it's all about the reduction. We cannot always change human behavior, as Nikki had alluded to and Jessica alluded to. People are going to do what people do. However, we as employers and building owners have an obligation to create a safe environment for people to interact with. And as business owners, we have a responsibility to reduce the risk of one person getting another person sick. And in the world I live in, we call that cross-contamination. But if we look at the stats here, from clean to unclean facilities, you can see that by having an infectious disease control program with measures in place, it ultimately reduces sick time and absenteeism. And we know that's going to cost dollars and dimes from a financial standpoint. But especially now in 2020, it also causes employees to disengage. If the employees aren't feeling safe and protected at work, if they don't have the peace of mind that their organization is doing everything and then more to protect them in the physical office, it will take them away from the work that they are performing. Certainly, there's plenty of individuals that can work from home, productively and safely, but even those individuals have the yearning to be part of the team. They want to come back to work. Nikki alluded to it. There's a lot of things we can do virtually, but as we want to bring our teams back and get them re-engaged, it's our obligation to provide these clean environments. We're going to talk here on the next slide about how we're going to start performing those, and one of those things we need to consider. So the first thing is, let's tackle this word clean, because the world I come from in the janitorial services and working in environmental services, when we hear the word clean, we think of one thing versus the average consumer. Well, what is clean? If you hire a cleaning company and say, hey, we're going to clean, well, what does that mean? And so if we look at here, this chart that's going to be available, it's really simple. Clean is a removal of solids, soils, and stains from the surface. It is visual. You can see whether it's clean or not. Is the waste paper gone or is it not? Is there dust or is it gone? Is there, soup or soda on the counter or not? That's clean. But now we talk about other words that are typically used in healthcare or food preparation or restaurant. Now we're talking about sanitized, disinfected, and sterilized. And those mean completely different things. And so this is the world we're living in today, where clean is just not good enough. You have to go up and beyond. And this is where we're starting to talk about sanitizing areas and disinfecting. We talk about sanitization. We're talking about reducing bacteria. We talk about disinfecting. We're talking about reducing bacteria and viruses. And that's the key. We want to be able to disinfect areas. Now we talk about sterilize. Those are surfaces and areas, that's when you're talking more hospital grade cleaning, where we're eliminating everything and the ability for additional spores to grow. But in everyday office environments, we have to at the very least disinfect. And the goal is to put in long-term solutions so we're not consistently just putting chemistry on surfaces. So we think about traditional cleaning. Even now, it is cleaning, the removal of solid soils and stains, and then disinfecting. And then typically the challenge, the last step is neglecting. What do you do next? What are you going to do with your air filtration? How do we keep the air purified and clean? How do we keep surfaces safe in between cleaning and disinfecting? And that's the biggest gap. And that's the direction that we have to go as, again, business owners and building owners, as we look at where the regulation is going to be and how we're going to protect our employees, so that when one person comes in, the opportunity and chance of them infecting a second person, that cross-contamination, is reduced. Next slide. So this is your liability. If we look back about 10 years, talking, this is more Nikki's role with the insurance, but prior to these SARS-CoV-1 outbreak back in 2002, 2003, there was business interruption insurance that could be applied if there was a pandemic or a major business disruption. Well, insurance companies, unfortunately, got rid of pandemics or viral as being a business interruption. So now we've seen this year that you can't, claim losses and go on your GL to get that liability, covered while you had people out of work, especially in places, manufacturing or restaurants, where people have to physically be present. So that's what happens in the past. But let's think about what's happened this year and what might happen in the future. We've already seen it this year that health departments have set benchmarks and have changed these benchmarks based off of different criteria throughout the year. And it's at the state level, the local level, the county level, the different levels. So the goal is that we get out in front of it. It is that we respond to the current situation, not react to the legislation. And we're going to talk about that right here in the next slide. This is simple. What you can do. If you go to the CDC's website, it is simple. All about planning. We got to develop, implement, maintain, and revise. One of the biggest things you can do with any plan is document, document, document. So we start with some simple things that are required by OSHA, are required by the CDC, which is your safety data sheet. So your safety data sheet, as you can see in the picture there, is a binder that shows all the chemicals used and the chemicals, the chemistry used within a facility. This is to ensure that we don't have products that are going to have a negative impact on each other. And a lot of people, you think, I don't even know where the safety data sheet is. Well, that's something you have to challenge the business owner or building owner to provide that. You want to make sure that we're living in an environment that we're using non-toxic, non-corrosive chemistry. We also want to make sure that our third-party cleaners are utilizing the processes that are already approved. This year, a lot of people got familiar with the EPA N list, which is a list of disinfectants proven to kill viruses. So this is where that data is stored. Got to make sure the SDS is properly updated, because if you get audited by OSHA or insurance companies, one of the first things they can look at is your SDS. Are you tracking the chemistry used within the facility to prevent those chemicals negatively interacting? And are they doing what you say they're doing? Second thing, you want to develop and implement an infectious disease control program. Sounds very intimidating, but it's really not. What that is taking known information, which is what is the environment we're living in? What are the things that we do within our facility? How many people do we have here? How often do they interact? How many people per square foot in a certain area? Some basic information. And what are we going to do to protect their safety? And this is through your cleaning programs, through cleaning, disinfecting, and utilizing technology to ensure a clean environment. It's really simple that. And then once you do that, is also document what you've done. Not just, okay, hey, January 1st, this is what we're going to do. Well, if you have regularly scheduled cleaning, who's checking off on it? Who's signing their name? Who's checking off? Are you monitoring the chemicals used? If someone says they're disinfecting, how much chemistry are they going to use? And are they doing it? If your program says it's going to take a gallon a month and you have a gallon that lasts you 3 months, well, that's a check and balance. You have to be able to implement the process, but also maintain and revise. Do we have too much chemistry or not? Are we actually utilizing it? Challenge those third-party cleaning companies to keep you, the business owner, engaged and informed. Next thing is work from home policies. clearly document from one employee to the next, one department to the next, what are the work at home policies? What are the things that we consider viable for working at home? The last thing you want is to have people that take advantage of your PTO or your sick time, or other people that work from home when it's unnecessary or when it's not best for the organization. So the best you can do is protect yourself as an organization is develop work at home policies, communicate them effectively to your employees. And that way you can effectively have a clear and concise plan across the board. And finally, this is the catch-all. Document any and all activities related to the control of contamination and cross-contamination. So if there's anything else you're doing as a business, any other vendors you're bringing in that might have an impact, make sure you're documenting, keeping receipts, keeping detailed records of chemistry use and best practices. The process of cleaning is two things. It is process and it is product. So understanding what the processes that individuals are using, and also what are the products they're using when they are implementing these cleaning processes and cleaning programs. Next thing you do is hire a third-party cleaning service. Most buildings and businesses have it. Now, the advantage of when you hire a third-party cleaning service is that they already have documented SOPs, standard operating procedures, that have been proven to work. You've also put the liability and put one layer in between you. So now you have someone you can communicate with that is up to date on maybe the latest changes from the CDC. The other thing they have is they have access. We know that early this year there was a lack of product. Well, most cleaning companies have product on their shelves so they can continue to clean and they're not running out to the store to go buy bleach and mix it themselves. So there's a huge advantage when you're hiring a third-party cleaning company. And when you are hiring that third-party cleaning company, challenge them to get you educated on what you're doing and make sure we have the documentation rolled up to protect the organization and the individuals within the organization. It goes back to leadership and right into the next point, as Nikki talked about. Have leadership engage in the cleaning program, not just in what's happening, but how we're communicating it to our customers and our employees. What are we doing? What is the desired result? And how is it going to impact the employees and the customers? When leadership is engaged, the rest of the organization will follow. Almost goes without saying, but continue to follow guidelines. This is one of the advantages of hiring a third-party cleaning company or a consulting firm, whatever the case is they're staying up to date on it. You run your business. You need to focus on what you do, what you produce, the widget or service that you sell to your customer. Having another entity focus on or within your company, within a department, focus on what the latest changes are to ensure you're staying in compliance, up to date, and preferably ahead of legislation. And finally, this is the battle cry, if you will, when it comes to the janitorial industry in 2020. Exceed the minimum standard. If you continue just to do the minimum standard, it's going to negatively impact the relationship that the organization and leadership has with their employees. Because if you're just doing the minimum, there's somebody else that's going to go up and beyond the minimum. So the best thing you do is research, look for the best solutions for your organization, and then implement those solutions. Maintain, revise, and don't let it slip. 2020 has shows how vulnerable we are, but every day we live in and around bacteria and viruses, and it's our obligation to our employees that we reduce the risk that those viruses and bacteria have on us. I'm really looking forward to the Q&A session with Nikki and Jessica so we can field the questions and dive deeper into some of these subjects that are of most interest to you. Thanks, Dan. Dan, you're on mute.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for your comments. We'll get into the questions, or a bunch of them. If you have others, submit them through the Q&A feature. Nikki, this is probably on everybody's mind. You mentioned it. Andy, you might have mentioned it. The CARES Act, the FFCRA is expiring at the end of the year. Unless we know something that changes between now and then, what should an employer do? You kind of touched on it, but Jessica, you might have some comments on this as well. When our employees have to be out for COVID reasons, do you force them to come back? Do you make, what would you say to that now without having anything as of, when it ends at January 1st?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I don't think any of us have the answer. So just some things I think to think through is, are you going to pay them after the first of the year? Because that's really the biggest question. they're being out, for the virus and for the care of their children. I don't know why you wouldn't cover that as a qualified leave. So I don't think you want to penalize somebody for being out after the first of the year, even though there's not per se an act to cover it. But the real question for us employers is, if we've been paying people this whole time because we've been getting these tax credits, what are we going to do as of January 1st? And I think really that's a decision that you need to make at your executive level. What are you going to do? Are people going to have to use their vacation when they're out? Or are you going to pay them? My biggest advice is that if no matter what you do, that you're keeping track of that time, because it wouldn't surprise me if something comes out January 18th or whatever the date may be. And if you're not tracking it, how are you going to know how much of that time would qualify for a leave if something does pass? But I really think that's an executive level leadership question of what you're going to do, but also understand the implications of that, which is if you don't pay people for that time, I can see people coming to work sick. Right now, everybody that has less than 500 employees is being open and honest about being sick or being exposed. Nobody says that they have to do that. It's just right now they're getting paid for that time, so they're very willing to do that. So that's just kind of a word of caution. So those are my thoughts. I don't know if you have anything to add, Jessica.
I do, and I completely echo everything you just said, Nikki, and I would add a couple of things to your point about things coming out potentially January 18th. So true. We've seen so many things come out that have actually been retroactive. So I would prepare for that. And we know that there's already discussions about extending FFCRA and what we're going to do with the CARES Act beyond December 31, but we don't know that yet. And to your point about it being an executive decision is so critical, because we need to not be handling this on a case-by-case basis. We're talking about illness, we're talking about childcare, we're talking about family status. These are all protected characteristics. So if we treat one person differently than we treated somebody else, now we've got discrimination too. And to Nikki's point about ensuring that people are not coming to work ill, that's important. We don't want to stop screening. As long as these guidelines are out there that tell us that our reasonable care is ensuring we're not allowing sick people into our environment, we need to be doing that. And we need to keep screening as long as that exists to the extent that the risk and proportionate to that risk. One other point that I just wanted to quickly make is we're seeing a lot of ADA type questions with regard to this. People saying that they can't come back because their doctor says that they are more at risk, etc. There is also a protection for the employer where the ADA does not require any employer to change a job or change the performance requirements of a job. That would be under the realm of undue hardship. So we recently had, for instance, a client who places children in foster care. They need to check up on kids. You can't do that without making an on-premise check. So now the kids are at risk if nobody's doing those premises checks. So that's something that we couldn't allow under ADA and had to make some other arrangements to make sure that that caseload was covered.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know, Nikki, you might know the answer. Does short-term disability come into play if this, if there isn't a backstop or a help to pay the employees?
Yeah, it's possible. Because of the act being passed, I don't think there has been like a huge influx of claims that way, but very possible. But it wouldn't apply though to people who are in situations where they have to take care of their children. And it wouldn't affect, like if you are quarantined, it would only, a claim would be considered as if you yourself are sick. So, a lot of us are facing a lot more people that are quarantined than actually sick. And short-term disability wouldn't apply because the person doesn't have a short-term disability if they're just quarantining.
There was a question about that quarantine. It seems like it's just been changed a little bit, the timeline. Can you or anybody, tell us more about that? What should we be doing, depending on tests and if you're sick, and 10 days versus 15 days?
Mhm. Yeah, I can speak to that. So, first of all, I mean, you don't have to do anything. There's nothing wrong with saying that you're going to continue to do things the way that you have been with having people be out for 14 days. That isn't necessarily wrong. But what they're saying right now is that the new rules say that if you've been exposed, so this only applies to whether you've been in direct contact or close contact with somebody with the virus. It was 14 days that you needed to stay away from work. It's now been reduced to 10 days if you don't get a test. So before it was 14 days, regardless of, if you got a test or not. Now it's 10 days if you don't get a test, and it's 7 days from that close contact if you do get a negative test. But you don't, like, one of the important things is that I've had people that run out and get a test on like the day after they've been exposed to somebody with close contact or with the virus. I mean, that doesn't do any good. Like, viruses don't just like suddenly magically wake up, even though you were just with the person last night. So I think from what I remember, I think they're telling you to test like around the day 5 mark of being exposed.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Just to echo what Nikki is saying, a lot of the changes we're seeing are relevant to when people are being tested. To her point about not being tested, that's one situation, but the countdown has been starting with the exposure. And some of the comments that we're also hearing are the false sense of security that people get because they have one test that is negative and now they're good to go. Well, who knows that they haven't been re-exposed, and
Sure.
and there are some questions there. So we're bound to see some continuous change with that, and it's good to have somebody monitoring that.
And as time goes on, people get more lackadaisical too. Andy, it was interesting. Jessica had the Maslow hierarchy, pyramid. Safety and security is, you can't get to the rest if you don't have that. What are some of the challenges you see businesses encountering when developing a cleaning program? You touched on it a little bit, but cleaning was an issue before. It's going to be an issue next year and the year beyond and the year beyond. But what's caused companies to take action now, and what's holding them back to take action now when it's seemingly most important time to do something?
Yeah, I mean, what's causing companies to take action now and this year is pretty simple, is awareness. In 2020, we have become aware of how susceptible we are. We also, if you look from a kind of HIPAA standpoint, right before, when people were out sick, you didn't ask questions. Well, that's the first thing we ask now. So it's awareness of what's going on in the big world, and also what's going on in and within our communities and with our businesses. So that's been the trigger mechanism typically. And now that we're aware of the challenges, now the next thing we have to do is understand where we are organizationally, and then research what's going to be the best course of action for your place of work. If the best course of action is everybody works from home in perpetuity, that's a course of action. If you have a hybrid solution where you reduce the number of desks and in the same square footage, that's a good course of action. If it's, hey, we're going to keep the same amount of desks, the same square footages, but we're going to have off work times, that's a solution. The biggest thing is understanding what's controllable. You talk about, it went from 14 days to 10 days to now 7 days. I also read this morning, CDC's website now said the antibodies, if you've been exposed to COVID and you've had COVID, test positive, now the antibodies are good for 6 months. That came out this morning. It was 90 days 2 days ago. So the information is going to consistently change. There's no doubt about it. But what you can control is what is your plan and what are you documenting? Because the challenge is what happens when someone comes back and files a workers' comp claim or argues with you about, well, why did I have to use PTO? The other person didn't. Or what if you're just at home sick, working from home? What does that look like? Now, all of a sudden, because you have not put the time and attention and care into your cleaning program, it's going to negatively impact other parts of your business. So what you can control is understanding, implementing, developing, and then revising and maintaining a plan. It's really that simple. operations guy, so I focus on what we can control. And then even when we are controlling it, are we going to bring in the right solutions so we're not just constantly hitting our hands with alcohol-based hand sanitizer and spraying chemicals every hour? Because spraying chemicals every hour over time creates superbugs. And also, 13% of Americans have known sensitivities to chemicals. So are you going to create a greater hazard by having chemicals that can negatively impact you topically or respiratory? So now that's a whole nother layer. So the best thing you can do is understand your employees, the needs of your business, and what solutions you're going to implement, relying on technology, not just old methodology.
How do you, just to follow up, a little follow-up question on that, how do you keep up with the demand of all the changes? And we've been talking a lot about employees, but you and then the other two may have something to add to this. I mean, what are customers expecting too? How do you keep up with the changing demands as an employer? First and foremost, to have your employees feel safe with all the challenges there, but then, oh, by the way, yeah, customers have to know this as well.
Yeah, you got to lead from the front. You have to stay out in front of what's going on in the world. If that means you have to watch the news, I have the CDC browser open. I got like 3 CDC browsers open every day, and I hit refresh just to see what things have changed. And not necessarily the number of cases. That's not as interesting to me from a scientific standpoint, but what the result of those things were. So like as of today, it went from 90 days of antibodies being true to 6 months. Okay, that's really relevant information in my world. And also as a leader of a business is, okay, hey, there's this new information, but we've already put a plan in place that exceeds the minimum standards that puts us out in front. It's the businesses that had people working from home that were able to adapt. It's the businesses that had cleaning processes in place and then adapted them versus saying, oh, we have to start all over or start anew, or now we have to go research companies or processes. So the best thing you can do is stay on top of it. And again, it's taking away time from what you're doing. So by bringing in organizations or individuals or relying on your strategic partners to be smart on it, there's some businesses that have, task force. So having a piece of your business, staying on top of it and then implementing solutions. That's the best thing you can do. And don't wait till you have a case to say, okay, well, now what do we do? Implement a plan. Challenge your insurance company, challenge your lawyer, challenge all these individuals like, hey, what are the best parts and pieces? And then put that in with your plan.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would add and echo Andy and what he's just said. Staying on top of it is so important. And if a company was good at knowing its customer coming into this pandemic, we should still be able to know our customers and be able to plug that new information in and be predictive. We can look at what worked and what didn't work in 2020. And Andy, to your point about hiring third person experts, obviously that's something that we fill that role so we know it works. But in choosing that, have somebody who really can also help you with the data science. There's a lot that 2020 taught us, and we can use that to extrapolate and make some really good decisions about 2021 and beyond by tapping into that data science. And
explain that more, Jessica, especially for the small to mid-sized company. How can you apply data science to this discussion?
It does become a little bit more challenging if you don't have somebody already in there. If you've got a production planner already probably well-versed in data science, it doesn't need to be more than one person. It could be a consulting firm. If you are relying upon a consulting firm, our biggest recommendation is make sure that they're really being careful and paying good attention to what your North Star is, meaning that they're not going to upsell you. Use data science. You can find statistics to back up just about anything you want to. So we certainly want to use data science in a way that is applicable to us, reliable, valid, and suits our purpose. So we want to know that data scientist, whether it's somebody we hire as one person, a production planner, or somebody that's already on board, or a third party that we would bring in, we want to know that their motives are true and that they're really watching our North Star, our own success, as opposed to trying to upsell us into something else.
Mhm. Okay, a couple questions regarding work at home and the vaccine. We've heard all kinds of companies are coming out with a vaccine. It's just a matter of days or weeks, if not sooner. From a legal standpoint, I mean, can you force people to have the vaccine? Can you force people to come back to work? What are obligations? What are the rights, and what's kind of the law, and what's a best practice in that regard?
What the courts are ultimately going to be looking for, and again, we want to keep everybody out of this argument. It's costly to win an argument, so we don't want these things to go to litigation or settlement. We want to be very proactive with that. What the courts are looking for is reasonable care. They're not looking and expecting that companies control human behavior, but we are looking for due diligence, reasonable care, and a lot of that gets signed off on by affirmative defense, your third-party expert opinions who can be an expert witness to say, yeah, this company took reasonable care to cover this. When it comes down to vaccines, as you're asking, and the testing, we're going to want to follow CDC guidelines. We're going to want to follow health department guidelines. Some of the things that we're seeing coming out of the health department are documentation. Andy said it before, it is so important to document. It's not just important what you do. It's important, it's critical that you document it. If you can't prove the documentation, you're not going to pass muster on a lot of these things. And we are going to see that there will be some pushback on some of the vaccines. We're seeing that already. We're seeing some news bullets coming out about side effects, and we already know that there have been anti-vaxxers that have been very loud in prior times. So that's to be expected. To be consistent is important, and to be proportionate to the risk of your company and your industry and the job is going to be very important.
Nikki, as a HR director of a company that's got many employees, what's happening internally that you can share to others from
Yeah.
what you're
Well, the vaccine, I actually did some research on it because I didn't know whether or not employers could require a vaccination. And so I was surprised to find out that answer is yes. I was astounded, and you think about the healthcare industry, they require vaccines, so you can't be a nurse at some facilities without having your shots. Just like when we send our kids to school, they have to have their vaccinations. So I was surprised. The experts are leaning towards that most of us employers would not be mandating it, especially something that has so much controversy surrounding it. But there, you can. We're an at-will state here in the state of Wisconsin, and if your leadership feels that that's going to be your requirement, you can. I just would be I'd be careful. Like I would not want to be the person mandating it for people. And when it comes to, telling people that they have to come back to work, that's another thing where I would be really careful to make sure that you're not being discriminatory. So when you ask that question, like if you are able to allow people to work from home, and you're going to target certain people and say, you can't work from home and you can't work from home, there should be a job related reason that they can't work from home. And if the bottom line is that it's a performance issue, address the performance issue rather than going down this slippery slope of saying, well, I think that person is spending too much time virtually schooling their children, so I'm going to have her come back to work, but this person I'm going to let stay out because she's got an underlying health condition and he's going to come. I don't think any of us want to get into that. So I would just be very careful and making sure that you're treating people in similar situations similarly, because this is the last thing that you want a lawsuit on, because I can't give you any case law at this point that says what would happen. So that's just my 2 cents is just to be really careful.
Yeah, a number of companies, the essential companies, grocery stores, manufacturing companies, a number of others. I mean, they've always been in person, at least those areas of their company that need to be. And some of those have had some work at home situations, while others, maybe professional organizations, are at home. We seem to be in this middle space of work at home, not work at home. Can I force them to come back? Can anybody shed some light on a best practices or how to start developing an employee manual that says these are the work performance issues if you're working at home or in the office, and working at home is not an excuse to not do these items on the work performance criteria.
Uh, I'll jump in because we face this challenge as a business.
Yeah.
We have employees that work here. So the best thing, and I'll tee up the ladies here to talk about the compliance, was as a fellow business owner, the first thing I did was ask the employees, what do you feel safe and comfortable with? What are your reasonable thoughts of working from home versus working in the office? Where do you work best? What are the tasks you do working best? What challenges do you see that are going to prohibit you from coming to work? We had a situation where we just did a 1 week shutdown of our entire office to kind of reset the plan. And then while we were all away from our office, then we gave our original ideas. We took those ideas in, and then we, along with our insurance company and our HR company, developed a plan and then communicated that to our employees. So I think the first thing you have to do if you want to be that leadership piece that Nikki talked about, solicit your employees. Make them part of that process. Have them own that return to work or work from home plan, whatever you end up labeling it. Have them part of the process, because ultimately they're your internal customer. You want to make them feel safe and at home within your organization. So as an employer, as a business owner, the best thing we did was we asked first, seek first to understand before being understood. Now, Nikki and Jessica will probably jump in about the more legal compliance and insurance compliance, but I think as a leader, you got to lead there by being a servant leader and seeing what your people need, want, and desire.
I completely agree with Andy. Thank you for everything you just said. And engaging the employees into that answer is so important. And that is a great use of servant leadership. At a minimum, the participative leadership. I would caution not to use a survey to get this answer. The idea of having the direct discussion is very, very important. And also there are going to be boundaries on what can and cannot be done. You don't want to be offering options that you can't enact, because that's just going to create frustration. So if somebody wants something that can't be done, it's an opportunity to not let that expectation build, but have a discussion with them and involve them into the decision making immediately. And what Andy's talking about gets that done. We are looking at so many statistics about remote work. I mean, we're looking at Google announces that they're going to keep remote work going through summer 2021, and tech companies can do this. We have another report that 43% of industry agnostic companies want remote work post-pandemic. So this even includes a lot of the jobs that shouldn't be done remote. Tech companies and tech positions that where people want it and feel that they can do it, and we've got work visibility and we've got compliance, those can be accommodated. But not every job and every company can be remote. So we need to look at the uniqueness and then plug in the right statistics.
It seems like a messy area, as I was asking before, that seems to be evolving. I mean, some people demand that they can, that they want to work at home, even though maybe the leader says, well, that's not a work at home kind of a position. And at what point do you say, no, you can't do that job at home? And if somebody else that they think is, well, they're similar to my job and they're working at home, that's when you get the discrimination issues. It seems like we're in this messy period for a bit until we figure it out, because we've had several questions and nobody has a crystal ball, but is work at home to stay? Well,
Yeah.
I would think you're all saying, yeah, at some point, some hybrid version of it at least seems to be here for the long term.
That is so true, Dan. And one of the things that we're really advocating is that these decisions are being made at an executive level, because leaders sometimes aren't the people who know the jobs the best. They should be. They certainly should be. But sometimes it's the people who are the doers that know what could be tweaked to make work more visible and more possible done remotely. And there was a lot of learning that happened in 2020 by necessity. So we don't want to dismiss that. We want to tap into what we've learned as leaders and what we've learned as the employees actually doing the work, and getting the executives involved. So you've got a top-down alignment.
Mhm. Um, a few more questions. Andy, I've been very curious about this on the cleaning process. You know, you hear a lot about UV light. How effective is that in the disinfection process? It seems like it's a new process since March, but I'm sure it's not, because that's not my world. But how effective is the UV light process?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I've been in and around UV light technology for over 2 years, and it is not a new process. UV light was used back in the 1930s. The first time it was ever used in a school was in the 1930s with a measles outbreak in Pennsylvania. That was hours and hours of research getting into UV light technology. So it's been around. There's no doubt it's been around. And predating humans on our planet, UV light rays are the planet's most powerful disinfectant. That's why when people say go out and get some fresh air, yes, air is blowing around, but the UV rays naturally destroy particulates, primarily viruses, in the air. There's certain wavelengths that kill them. We now, as humans, be able to understand those wavelengths and then utilize those wavelengths. There's certain wavelengths that do a better job at destroying certain particulates than others, and then introduce them into everyday environments. So UV lights have been used in hospitals for 40 plus years. Really, the last 10 to 15 years, they've been utilized more and more. And that's the direction the world is going. Whether you use UV light technology or other technologies in your air duct system to treat the air that's passing over, and then again, introducing UV light into areas where you can treat surfaces. It's been used in kitchens and hospitals and arenas and industries like that. So the technology's there, the products are there, but now it's about how do we introduce it into existing workspaces. I've done some consulting work on new buildings and new project builds. We have one that we're working right now where it's a daycare facility and they want to build it with UV light technology already built. Well, that's a very simple process because we know how the UV light works. We know how to incorporate the products into a new build. But we're talking about existing buildings. That's where it's a little bit more challenging. And again, what you can control is challenging. And there's all this information out there. So the best thing you can do is understand what UV light is capable of doing, and then understand from a cost benefit analysis how to incorporate it into your facility to protect your people. And that's a big thing. You know, the challenge of 2020 is there's a lot of information, so that information will become very overwhelming.
So one last question regarding the cleaning industry. It seems like it's been really put on the map this year. Where do you see it continuing to develop in 2021? Just, real briefly.
Liability. I think the relationship between business owners and building owners and cleaning companies are going to get closer because they have a shared liability and responsibility for taking care of the people that come into those facilities.
Mm-hmm.
How that manifests, I'm not sure, but that relationship has to get closer and tighter.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. All right, we've got time for one last question that all three of you, I want to have you weigh in on. There's a question, leadership styles, and we hear about reinvention. This is a reset. What are some of the best tools? Maybe Jessica, you can start. What are some of the best tools for creating new ideas and ways to look beyond? This whole program is about. The theme is, what can we control? How do we do that and not react, but be proactive to make change rather than be changed? Reinventing, implementing the proper leadership styles. What are some of the tools and ways we can go about doing that in the last couple minutes here?
Sure, absolutely. Touched a little bit on the 6 hats of thinking and various other great roundtable types of exercises that really empower people at all levels to be part of that problem solving and creative planning. Anything is possible. The dream session, get those going. That'll be really important to coming up with the best ideas to get to capture those silver lining opportunities. On the risk side, it's about remembering that it's not just what you do, but to document everything. Prepare your documentation about all of the steps that you've taken as if Judge Judy will be presiding over your courtroom. Know that the legal system isn't necessarily demanding, again, complete control, but reasonable care. We're really looking at reasonable care. To that extent, be prepared, have things ready with documentation, be prepared for random audits. We're talking a lot also about so many important topics here, but don't forget there's a couple more that we didn't shed a whole lot of light on yet today. And those are really addressing racial tensions and the legalization of marijuana and how we need to be looking at new training and new policies for anti-discrimination and anti-harassment. And we need to be looking at a redo of our policies on DNA to make sure that we're including legal drugs, including OTC and prescription as well, and taking some management judgment stance there.
Great. Nikki, anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, bottom line from my perspective is take care of your employees. It is going to be very hard to find people. And one of the questions that came up in the chat window is, hey, I'm really struggling to find people. We all are going to struggle to find people. And the person asked, are people leaving the workforce? And I think that they are. I mean, I couldn't find any definitive research on that, but just in my own experience, I think there's people that are saying, I'm out of here. I'm going to retire now. I was close enough. I was maybe going to work a couple more years, but I'm done. I'm not dealing with this COVID stuff anymore. I think there's moms and dads who are like, I can't virtually school my 6-year-old and work. And I've just said, okay, one parent's going to stay home now. So absolutely, Phil, your question about, people deciding not to work during these times, absolutely that's happening. So from my perspective, it's so much easier to retain a person than to find a person. So just take care of your people, be a great leader. That's the part that I think that we can control the most as we go into 2021.
Yeah, great words of wisdom. Andy, take us home.
Simple. Check yourself at the door as a leader. I'll be as blunt as I can be. If anything, 2020 has taught us, it doesn't matter your race, religion, creed, sexual orientation, title in the company. We are all susceptible to outside forces. This is the opportunity for us to come together as leaders, understand where the challenges are with our employees, where the challenges are within our organization, be blunt and transparent about your vulnerabilities, seek first to understand their perspective, and then lead. Go out and lead by taking the first step forward. Make sure you have all the compliance stuff. Make sure you make sure the workplace is fun. Retain your best talent, but go out and lead. We are no longer in the world of managing and reacting. We have to lead and respond.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, everybody. This concludes our webcast. Thank you to the presenters and partners. Once again, Jessica Ohlenberg with Ohlenberg LLC, Nikki Johnson with R&R Insurance Services, Andy Wines, president of Green Up Solutions. These are the experts. You'll find their contact information if you haven't noticed on the screen. And they're more than happy to help you regarding issues related to taking charge of the future, understanding customer demands and employee needs, building and maintaining business culture and morale, and increasing employee productivity with safe environments. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact them. As I mentioned earlier, this webcast is recorded and will be available on our website, certainly by tomorrow, possibly later today. And the slide deck will be available, should be available online now. When you exit the webcast, a new tab will open in your browser with the survey. Just fill out the survey and then you'll have access to the slide deck. We ask you to do that because we certainly value your feedback as we look to have more of these kinds of webcasts in the future. So on behalf of our webcast presenters and partners, Olenberg LLC, R&R Insurance, GreenUp Solutions, and BT360 Content Solutions, which is the storytelling arm of BizTimes Media. Thank you so much for your time and for attending today. And have a great rest of the day and a great holiday season. Thanks, everybody.